thanks for joining us on our podcast series. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself and give us an overview of your kind of career to date?
Okay, hi Katherine, and thank you so much for inviting me to do this. It's definitely a topic that I'm very passionate about, women in risk management. I started my career in banking at the age of 18. That was on the advice of my grandfather, who said banking was a stable environment, it was a job for life, but things have obviously very much changed over the last few years. First 5 years of my career, I was in retail. I got the opportunity to experience all sorts of different roles. And what was great about that is I didn't feel under any pressure to chase promotions. So I got an opportunity to really learn about what I loved about banking. And I then moved into risk and compliance, and that's been my home ever since. So I've been very lucky to work for Nationwide, Royal Bank of Scotland, Barclays, and more recently, I've spent 5 years in the challenger bank market, which has been the most amazing experience. And that's what's led me to Ashman Finance, where I'm currently the Chief Risk Officer there. And that combines my love of risk management, banking, but also with a social and a governance angle as well, which is brilliant.
Fantastic. And you've obviously had a very rewarding career to date, and that will continue. I suppose something that's really important is attracting women into risk in itself. And there's definitely a sort of a gender gap, I suppose. So why do you think women are less visible in senior risk and compliance roles in financial services?
It's a really interesting question, because when I started working in financial services industry over 30 years ago, you looked up and all you saw, to be quite frank, were white men. And things have dramatically improved over the last few years. So we've definitely got more female role models. And when you look up, you see a lot more diversity, but it still doesn't reflect the general diversity of the general workforce in banking. And for me, there's 3 reasons. So first, there is a lack of really strong female role models in numbers at the more senior levels in risk. I really love this statement from the Harvard Business Review that says, as one millennial banker we interviewed put it, all of our senior leaders are older white males. They are the ones that set the culture that we experience every day, despite any programmatic efforts by the bank. So I think that really sums up that actually, if you're looking up and it is still predominantly an undiverse area, and that's the culture, it's going to be more difficult for you to imagine yourself there. The second is that risk is a hugely diverse subject, and women, for one reason or another, are more inclined to the operational risk and compliance areas rather than the credit and the market risk areas. And you definitely see women self-selecting out of opportunities because they think they don't know it all. You wouldn't necessarily see a man do that. He'd think, I know half of that, let's go for it. Whereas women think they have to know everything, so stick with what's safe. And then lastly, I think risk and compliance is, particularly in the second line of defence, is a more confrontational role, and it requires you to challenge, it requires you to stand your ground. And when you're in a meeting room, having to do that surrounded by people who don't look like you, don't think like you, it makes it a more difficult choice to take that role. So I think women are deselecting out of the process.
Do you think there could be anything done at kind of education level, for example, to attract that talent originally into kind of more technical kind of risk areas?
Absolutely. I think I was enormously lucky when I was at school. So I had the opportunity to actually run a school bank. That was brilliant because it opened my eyes up to subjects and topics and careers that I really hadn't imagined myself in. I think risk management is enormously diverse. And when you look at schools, actually girls and boys at the beginning of their school life are equally as good at things like maths and statistics and algebra and science. But as time goes on, girls start to deselect themselves out of those more statistical areas. So I think schools definitely have a greater role to play in showing the different types of careers that they can go into, exciting them about the opportunities, explaining how women naturally think about risk. So they naturally look at two sides of a problem and therefore can be hugely successful in the role. So whether it's bringing in people to showcase, where girls can look at women in senior industry so they can imagine themselves there, or providing mentors, or actually just encouraging girls to try new things. I definitely think there's more that can be done.
So what do you think could be implemented within organisations as much as kind of from the education piece upwards?
Yeah, so I think there's some standard things such as flexible working, opportunity to work from home, allowing women not to have to make a choice between family and careers. But to be honest with you, in today's day and age, that cuts across both men and women. I think specifically for women, I think allowing secondments, allowing rotations, showing a clear career path to become successful in the field without having to show masculine traits. So actually encouraging women in terms of the added value that they can bring to the role. Ultimately, and I know this is a very unpopular view in some quarters, I think you would have to go down the quota route if things did not improve. Because naturally, as I said, I think women are deselecting, but there's also an inclination to think that in the more statistical or geeky areas, there is a much greater male dominance. And I think we need to start moving away from those ideas. One of the reasons I loved working for Ashman actually is when I joined, again, it was a predominantly male environment, but they actually acknowledged that as a woman, you automatically brought diverse thinking and therefore would make the firm more successful. And I think we need to start embedding more of that thinking in firms. But at the moment, there is an element of ticking the box on diversity rather than actually, I think, truly committing to meeting what's needed.
I suppose we are actually targeted on shortlisting for all roles that we provide support for, especially within the banking community, and off the back of the kind of new FCA announcements. I think that will only continue further, really, across all financial services. But the shortlisting is fine. What ultimately we want is to find the best person for the role. But with females being a little bit, more risk adverse and not putting themselves forward, even if enabling them to get onto a shortlist, will be encouraging them in the right direction, which is really positive. And finally, your sort of top tip for anyone starting their career or progressing to a senior management role within the kind of risk and compliance space, what's that top tip?
Okay, so I think generally my top tip is try as many different roles as you possibly can early on in your career. Don't be afraid to move into roles that challenge you, that you don't know a lot about. Having worked with you, Katherine, for a number of years, I love the way that you encourage women to think about roles as opportunities rather than hurdles to get over. And I think that's really important. And then I think ultimately, if you want to progress, the best advice that I was ever given was by a gentleman called Tony Prestige at Nationwide Building Society. And he said to me, if you look up and there are no role models that look like you, then become the inspiration that other women want to see. And believe in yourself because no one else needs to. And I think that was amazing in terms of it's okay to think you are great and to go forward on that basis.
Yeah, no, that's really empowering. And is there anything else that you want to add today?
I suppose the only thing that I would like to add is if there are any women out there thinking about going into risk management at senior level, then talk to you, or they can by all means talk to me. I'd love to talk to women who want to progress.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much for your time today. It's really useful. It's really inspiring. And it's great to see you as a role model within kind of that senior risk management profession. Awesome. Okay. Thanks very much, Lisa.
Thank you, Katherine.